They said love cools with time, but what if love burns hotter the longer you hold it? This is not just a story, it's a feeling that creeps under your skin and stays there. If you believe love can still be wild, dangerous, and unforgettable, subscribe now and step into a story that refuses to let your heart remain untouched. The first time Ion saw Alara, the world did something strange, as if it leaned closer to listen. The cafe was loud with clinking cups and half-finished conversations, but she sat by the window in a stillness that felt deliberate, like she was guarding something fragile inside her. Steam curled up from her mug, blurring the glass and turning the street outside into a watercolor of moving lights. Ion told himself he was only looking because the chair across from her was empty and the place was full, but even as he approached, he knew that was a lie. Something about her presence carried heat, not the kind that scorches instantly, but the slow, patient warmth that seeps into your bones before you realize you're cold no longer. He asked if the seat was taken, and when she shook her head, her eyes met his with a calm intensity that felt like a question he wasn't ready to answer. Their conversation began with nothing important at all. Weather, work, the bitterness of over-roasted coffee beans. Yet beneath the ordinary words, something restless stirred. Alara spoke with a softness that made even casual sentences feel considered, as if she weighed each word before letting it go. Ion found himself leaning in without meaning to, drawn by the cadence of her voice and the way she smiled with only one corner of her mouth, as if sharing a private joke with herself. When she laughed, it was quiet but full, and he felt it settle somewhere deep in his chest. Time bent around them. Minutes stretched into an hour, and when they finally stood to leave, the idea of walking away felt wrong, like setting down a book in the middle of a sentence. They walked together without planning to, drifting onto the same street as if pulled by an invisible thread. The evening air was cool, but the space between them hummed with warmth. Ion noticed how Alara's sleeve brushed his wrist now and then, accidental touches that sparked more awareness than any deliberate gesture could have. He wanted to say something meaningful, something that would anchor this moment in memory, but the words refused to form. When they reached a corner where their paths were meant to split, Alara stopped. She looked at him with that steady gaze again, and for a heartbeat, the city seemed to hold its breath. "I'm glad you sat down," she said. It was simple, but the way she said it made his pulse jump. He watched her walk away, carrying with her the warmth she had ignited, leaving him standing there with a smile he couldn't explain. Days passed, then weeks, and still she lingered in his thoughts. When they met again, this time intentionally, it felt less like a first date and more like a continuation of something already begun. They learned each other in layers. Ion discovered that Alara loved old songs and late-night drives, that she believed silence could be as intimate as touch. Alara learned that Ion paid attention to details most people missed, that he listened not just to words but to the spaces between them. Their closeness grew in moments rather than milestones. Shared glances across crowded rooms, fingers brushing when they reached for the same thing, the way conversations deepened as the night wore on. Desire lived there too, undeniable but unspoken, like a fire banked carefully, waiting for the right moment to flare. When that moment came, it wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, almost reverent. They stood in Alara's apartment, rain tapping softly against the windows, the city wrapped in a hush. Ion felt the pull toward her like gravity, steady and inescapable. When he reached out, it was with a question in his eyes rather than urgency in his hands. Alara answered by stepping closer, closing the distance until the warmth between them was no longer imagined. The air felt thick, charged with everything they hadn't said. Their closeness was unhurried, a shared understanding that whatever they were about to begin deserved patience. In that stillness, the world narrowed to breath and heartbeat, to the comfort of being seen and wanted in the same instant. Their love unfolded like a slow-burning flame, brightening with time instead of fading. There were nights filled with laughter and mornings heavy with quiet affection. They learned how to argue without cruelty, how to forgive without keeping score. The heat between them never disappeared. It changed, deepening into something richer and more dangerous in its intensity. It lived in the way Alara looked at Ion when she thought he wasn't watching, in the way his voice softened when he said her name. Together, they discovered that passion didn't need to shout to be powerful. Sometimes it whispered, threading itself through daily life until even the ordinary felt electric. But love, especially the kind that burns hot, does not exist without shadows. Doubt crept in when expectations collided with reality. Ion feared losing himself in the intensity of what they shared. Alara feared being left when the fire demanded more than comfort. They hurt each other without meaning to, words spoken too quickly, silences held too long. For a time, the warmth between them dimmed, replaced by distance that felt colder for having known heat. They moved around each other carefully, as if afraid the slightest touch might shatter what remained. It was Alara who finally broke the silence. She spoke not with accusation, but with honesty, laying bare her fears and hopes alike. Ion listened, truly listened, and in doing so, recognized his own reflection in her words. They chose each other again in that moment, not because it was easy, but because the alternative, walking away, felt unbearable. Rebuilding was slower than falling in love had been, but it was stronger for it. Trust returned, tempered and resilient, and with it came a renewed closeness that felt earned rather than accidental. Years passed, marked by change and growth. The fire between them never went out, but it learned new shapes. Sometimes it was a blaze, consuming and bright. Other times it was an ember, steady and reassuring. They learned that love was not about constant intensity, but about choosing to tend the flame, day after day. In doing so, they found a heat that did not destroy, but sustained. When Ion looked at Alara across a room full of people, he still felt that familiar pull, the quiet certainty that some connections are rare enough to feel miraculous. On an ordinary evening that felt anything but, they returned to the cafe where they had first met. The chairs were different, the menu updated, but the window seat remained. They sat there together, hands intertwined, watching steam rise from their mugs just as it had years before. Ion realized then that love's greatest power was not in its beginnings, but in its endurance. What they shared was not a fleeting spark, but a living fire, shaped by time, choice, and unwavering commitment. Alara met his gaze and smiled that same half-smile, and he knew that no matter how the world shifted around them, the warmth they had created would remain. If this story stirred something in you, if you believe love can be fierce, patient, and lasting, don't keep it to yourself. Like, share, and subscribe for more stories that explore the fire at the heart of human connection. Your support keeps these stories burning, and the next one might be exactly what your heart needs.